I'd like to thank Senator from Virginia for his leadership on this issue. On the AUMF, he's been at it a long time. The two of us have been at it for quite a while, and I think that this is the year. This is the time. We're well past time for an AUMF. And I'd like to thank the senator from Kentucky for focusing the Senate's attention on the 16-year-old authorization for use of military force. As a freshman member of the House of Representatives, I voted in favor of the 2001 authorization on September 14th, 2001, almost 16 years ago to the day. September 14th, 2001. I can attest that when I voted for that law, I had no idea that it would still be in effect 16 years later. Now, since its passage, more than 300 members of the House who took that vote that day on September 14th, 2001, more than 300 members of the House are no longer in office. Of the senators who voted, only 23 remain in the Senate today. 23 out of 100. That comes out to about 70% of the Congress who have not voted to authorize force against terrorist groups abroad. It is long past time for Congress to calibrate the legal underpinning of the war against terrorism to today's realities. ISIS, for example, did not exist when the 2001 law was approved. We've learned a number of things since we voted to go to war with the perpetrators of 9/11 attacks. And I think it's time to incorporate those lessons into a new AUMF. For example, we've learned that no administration is ever going to want to have powers granted under the 2001 law curtailed. The Obama administration fought efforts to put an ISIS-specific AUMF in place, and the Trump administration has signaled that it believes that the 2001 authorities are adequate, and it does not plan to seek a new AUMF. We've also learned that crafting a new AUMF that garners bipartisan support is an especially difficult task. I know because we've been trying for a while. I think we can all agree that the only thing worse than having the 2001 statute in place is a partisan vote on a new AUMF. And lastly, we've learned that America is strongest when we speak with one voice, which means that Congress needs to have some buy-in. We have to have some skin in the game. Otherwise, we can simply blame the administration for any effort overseas. We can't let wars against new terrorist groups like ISIS be waged only by the executive branch. We in Congress need to weigh in, and we've got to let our allies and our adversaries know that we're serious, that we're committed. Now, taking these lessons into account, I think it's imperative for any future terrorism-related AUMF to include a sunset provision that requires Congress to put skin in the game. That way, we can avoid being put in a position that we're in today, having to vote on an amendment to repeal a law that authorizes force against groups that are actively planning attacks against American interests. Ultimately, I cannot support my colleagues' effort to repeal the 2001 AUMF in 6 months because of the very real risk associated with repealing such a vital law before we have something to replace it with. Fortunately, I know that the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee remains committed to considering legislation to repeal the 2001 AUMF and to replace it. As I mentioned, the senator from Virginia and myself have introduced legislation to do just that. That legislation, S.J. Res. 43, would repeal the 2001 law and authorize the use of force against al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS. It would allow for greater congressional oversight of what groups can be deemed as, quote, associated forces, unquote, of these organizations. It also contains a sunset provision. And so I look forward to working with my colleague from Kentucky, as well as other members of the Foreign Relations Committee, to move an AUMF that can garner bipartisan support. That is the right way to do it, under regular order, moving it through the Foreign Relations Committee, and then here to the floor, where we can debate and we can have buy-in, and that the Senate can vote on an AUMF, and then the House, and then the United States government, the Congress, and the executive branch can speak with one voice. So with that, Mr. President, I yield back.